Hi guys, so today I'm going to talk to you about a post I've actually seen on London Vegans. So this should be a really interesting video. It's called Veganism is White Supremacy. Despite the fact that the vegan movement is largely supported and advanced by people of colour, mainstream veganism is overwhelmingly white, inaccessible, and too often is complicit in maintaining white supremacy over our food system and the world at large. Okay, so veganism is not inaccessible. As someone who has only ever earned less than 6,000 a year, I can tell you point blank that veganism is very affordable for people on a low income. People who have access to shops and supermarkets and that kind of thing can easily buy beans, rice, potatoes, those kind of staple foods, and vegetables for that matter, canned vegetables. Those staple foods are very, very, very inexpensive. And that's why there are a lot of people actually eating less meat because they can't afford it. It's probably why you see quite a large proportion of African Americans eating a more vegan diet or eating less meat because it's quite expensive. In terms of veganism being inaccessible, the only people that I could imagine veganism being inaccessible for are people that are homeless and don't get choice over the food that they want to eat. Are people who are maybe, people who are in eating disorder clinics. Again, if you're in an eating disorder clinic, you don't have the option of healthy vegan food. You have to eat what you're given. People in third world countries, or maybe certain poor people in China. So if you're a farmer farming meat and vegetables, that's really, all you have. And you might not have, access to anything else. You might just have to eat what you're given or starve. And so, those kind of people, veganism isn't accessible for. But the majority of people living in a Western society, veganism is perfectly accessible for. In which mainstream veganism upholds white supremacy. Repackaging traditionally eaten foods by black, indigenous and minority people of colour have eaten for centuries as new and novel, such as tofu, quinoa, chia and papayas. Okay, so the first issue that I have is, I don't really see that there's an issue in repackaging food traditionally eaten by people of colour as new and novel. It's just an advertising ploy to sell more of those products, so to sell more tofu or to sell more chia seeds or other products. And unless, as long as the products being sold are fair trade and the workers working on those, soybean plantations and chia seed plantations are getting a fair wage for their work, and I don't see repackaging food as new and novel as a big deal. As long as those people are getting a fair wage for the work, it shouldn't matter whether we package it as new and novel or however you want to package it, with stars on the package or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like a non-issue. I suppose one of the things that I find quite concerning is that people push this idea that veganism is somehow exploiting workers from abroad. So it's exploiting workers working on a tofu plantation in China because we're eating tofu. Okay, but that soybean plantation could be used to feed a cow, yeah? And the cow would eat 10 times as much soybeans as a person would eat to produce the same amount of food. And so I think the first thing you need to do if you're concerned about buying more ethical products, which I'm concerned about, is actually go vegan first and then work on buying more fair trade products when you can. Okay, second point, appropriating black culture by selling cookbooks and recipes. When you start talking about cultural appropriation, I'm just like, oh God. The thing is with cultural appropriation is that why wouldn't you be able to make a recipe from another culture? I don't understand that. Like, you appreciate the culture, you want to make something similar at home. Why is that a bad thing? It's a, you know, it's a showing, to me, it's showing appreciation of that culture and that cuisine. If someone wanted to cook roast potatoes or they wanted to cook sausage rolls, I'd be quite happy with them doing that. And the other thing is that I've seen a number of examples when I've been to China, and there was an Indian guy who actually posted an example of this online, of non-Western people making British food, okay, or American food or Western food. So I went to China, and there was one milkshake manufacturer that was in China, and they had strawberry milkshakes with cheese in them, right? And I was like, oh, that's gross. But I don't care if Chinese people want to make a strawberry milkshake with cheese in it, even though it's basically a culturally appropriating the American people who originally made the milkshake. Again, I saw an Indian guy who made a sausage roll, and it was a naan bread with some sausage in it, and it had some like ketchup on top. And I was thinking, that's like not a sausage roll, mate, but like, you know, I don't care. I don't care what other people want to do with my cuisine. I don't care if other people make their own versions of my cuisine. You share different recipes and different ideas with people, and if someone tries to make something of yours, even if it's not very good, it shows a certain amount of appreciation of your culture. And so I don't think Black Americans should care about people culturally appropriating their recipes. They're just trying to make their own version of their recipe. And you know what? If they do it wrong, I'm sure someone would love to eat the right version of your cuisine. So I wouldn't worry about it. Okay, gentrifying and predominating non-white communities by opening up white-owned, operated vegan restaurants. Okay, firstly, I don't see the problem in opening up a white-owned restaurant in a black area. That white-owned restaurant is probably not going to be it's probably not going to be run completely by white people, especially as it's in a black area. It's going to create a source of income for people who live in that area. You know, people, you know, you'll have black workers working in that restaurant. And so I don't see why that's a problem. And if you do have a problem with a white business in your local black community, then you don't have to go to that business. You can go to any other business down the street. It's a free country, and they can open up a white-owned business in a black area if they want to. But that white-owned business will contribute to the local economy, and it will give people more access to healthy food in the local area, maybe, and it will also give black people jobs in the local area who need them. So there's nothing wrong with opening up a restaurant in a black area. I don't understand. Failures to speak on the mistreatment of farm workers who are largely undocumented. Okay, so I have actually spoke out about the undocumented immigrants in the UK. I've said I don't want undocumented immigrants in the UK, and people have called me a racist. So, right, I will speak out again on why I don't want undocumented immigrants in the country. The reason that I don't want undocumented immigrants in the country is because a lot of these undocumented immigrants are exploited. They're exploited for their work. They're you know, they have people coming around like villages in China or villages in India or villages in Africa, and they say, oh look, we're going to give jobs to your kids, you know, take your kids to England and they can have a job, or take your kids to America and they can have a job. And then these people, if they don't die on the trip on the way to England, they get taken and forced to work on a farm, like 12-hour long shifts every single day. They get forced to work on you know, in a factory, very long hour shifts every single day. It's not a nice life for these people, and I think that we should not be, you know, I think that we should have very, very strict borders and make sure that illegal immigrants don't come into the country, and that, you know, that the illegal immigrants are taken back to where they belong, because we don't know whether these people are actually going to a safe place to begin with. We don't know if they're going to be exploited for farm labour. We don't know if they're going to be exploited for sex work. So I think that we should have very strict borders, and that anyone coming into our country who's an undocumented immigrant should be sent back home. Okay, so black and non-white vegans don't co-opt the BLM or other movements led by black, indigenous and people of colour to promote animal rights. So I actually really, really hate it when vegans do this. The reason that I really, really hate it when vegans do this is because I mean, I understand if you want to, on your personal profile, you want to say animal lives matter and people lives matter, then and black people's lives matter, then go for it. I don't care what you do on your own channel or your own blog or whatever. But what I'm really quite upset with is the fact that anyone who speaks out against Black Lives Matter or anyone who speaks out against feminism is no longer a vegan anymore, and they're cast out from the vegan movement. I've been taken off Facebook groups because I've been openly anti-BLM. I've been taken off out of my local vegan community because I've been openly anti-BLM. Even if you vote Conservative, which some people consider racist now, you are taken out of vegan Facebook groups. And this is because there is only 4% of vegans are actually voted Trump in the last election, and 50% of vegans think that social justice issues are part of veganism, which they're simply not. White and non-black vegans don't go back to normal and remain complicit. So it depends what you mean by going back to normal and remain complicit. If you mean that white vegans, you know, should start buying more fair trade products, white vegans should start buying clothes from charity shops and recycled clothing, then yes, I think everyone should do that, not just white vegans, but black vegans as well. Anyone who has the means and abilities to buy more fair trade products and to buy clothes from charity shops should do that. However, it kind of seems from this whole text that you're like a racist if you don't support the BLM, or you're a racist if you think that, for example, the issues to do with race and crime rate are more to do with cultural differences between different groups than the ethnicity of these people. So, for example, I think that black people in the UK are more likely to commit crimes than white people, because kids from African Caribbean households are more likely to come from single parent households. They're twice as likely as white kids to come from single parent households. So I think that's what's contributing to the crime rate, partly. I also think it's partly the fact that we had a Windrush generation who came here in the 60s, and often you have a cycle of poverty in the UK. So if if your parents are poor, you don't go to a very good school, and then you don't end up getting a very good job, and then your kids are poor, and so you have this cycle of poverty going around. So I think it's more of a class issue than a race issue. And in order to identify this, when you look at Indian people, we often immigrate people from India because they're good doctors and nurses, and so the people from India are coming in at a very high level, high career level. They also tend to have more nuclear families, more intact families than white people, and so those people actually have a lower crime rate than white people do. So I think that the crime rate is more to do with cultural differences than race differences. Are you going to say that's me being complicit or going back to normal? Because that's, to me, what's going on. And I think that there's a big issue within the left of policing of speech. You basically just tell everyone to shut up who has a different opinion, from everything being about structural oppression or structural racism, which I find ridiculous. Okay, so white and non-black vegans do acknowledge the role that Black, Indigenous and people of colour had in developing your favourite foods. So yeah, I think I appreciate that Black people invented some of my favourite foods, and Chinese people invented some of my favourite foods, and Indian people invented some of my favourite foods, and all sorts of people invented different elements of my favourite foods. But I think that we should also appreciate the role that white people have in making your favourite foods, like pasta from Italy and sausage rolls from England and haggis from Scotland, and whatever your favourite foods are. I mean, there are a lot of white foods or Western foods that we should also appreciate. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Educate yourself in ways your food systems perpetuate white supremacy. So, okay, I think the narrative kind of goes like this. You have big corporations from America and the UK, and they basically exploit workers in places like China and India and probably places in Africa as well. But the issue is that it's not white supremacy, because you have rich Chinese people, Chinese businessmen, who own companies in China, and like they produce tofu, let's say, so they own a tofu company in China, and they're exploiting all of their workers in order to sell this tofu to the UK. And they have all sorts of companies like this in India and China and parts of Africa as well. So it's not just rich white people exploiting poor Chinese people. It's rich Chinese people exploiting poor Chinese people. So the food system is much more complex than you're making it out to be. And if we didn't buy, let's say we stopped buying tofu from China because it's cultural appropriation and we're exploiting Chinese workers, well, you'd still have a massive problem with Chinese people, rich Chinese people buying tofu from China, which exploits Chinese workers for very little pay. So it's a very complicated system. We can only do the best that we can, and we can only try and buy fair trade products from these places. But we should also be encouraging rich and middle class Chinese, African and Indian people to buy more fair trade products as well, to buy products which actually support poor people as opposed to push them down. Okay, so we need to dismantle white supremacy in all its illustrations, including in our movement and in our food systems. So I think that the main issue with the vegan movement is not white supremacy. I think that the main issue within the vegan movement is the policing of vegan voices which are different. We can't police people who have a different opinion. We can't exclude people who have a different opinion from events, because then you're just not appealing to people who are right-wing. I mean, I've been told that being right-wing is racist, which it's just not. So you need to include everyone in the movement, which is the main issue with veganism at the moment, is that you can't be vegan unless you're left-wing, you can't be vegan unless you're pro-BLM, you can't be vegan unless you're feminist. And all of these things have nothing to do with veganism. In terms of our food system, there's a lot of things that we can do, but really the first step is going vegan, because you can cut out a lot of exploitation of you know, black farm workers and indigenous farm workers and Chinese farm workers by going vegan in the first place. And then you can work on the products that you're actually buying being more ethical and supporting people who are very, very poor within other communities around the world. Okay, so now I'm going to answer a question I got from one of my friends, which is about transitioning from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture. Okay, if our farm was to transition to completely plant-based, the big issue would be what to do with the grass. If we let wild animals multiply, we still have a significant area of virgin scrub. Our place which provides shelter for wild animals, they will continue out and eat our green crops in preference to the grass. We can't farm grassland because if it was left, areas of grass would erode and when the rain comes. The soil is not suited to forestry. We could run cows as a sentry like your friend. We need a certain amount of income for this, which would be hundreds of dollars per head per year. If vegans could come up with the cash, I think it could be done, but in my opinion, the vegan movement is better off buying properties themselves and managing them as they see fit. Right, so my personal opinion would be to think outside the box. So if you can't use the land for farming, why try and use the land for farming? That would be my answer. Why not think about using the land for events of some description? So I know that woodland weddings have become quite popular in England, and I'm sure if it's a sunny Australian place, then they'll probably be quite popular there. So maybe have your event, you know, your field open for events of some description. Maybe have it open for festivals. Maybe have, you know, like glamping tents. They're like big tents that you could have, and people could stay in on your land at certain times of year. So those would be ways of using the land without farming it in any way, and you could just mow it and, you know, put down some vegan compost on it, and that would be perfectly fine. So I would think about using the land in a way that wasn't that was more abstract. I mean, you could actually have, if it's a certain area of land and you have shrubland around the outside, you could have you know, solar panels on a bit of it. That would be one source of income, just having a field of solar panels, and then you could leave a part of it for the animals, the, you know, the little animal inhabitants over there. Often you actually have grass growing around the solar panels as well, so that could be, you know, a space for little animals to go around. So I would think more abstractly about the land that you have and how to use it, as opposed to just using it for farmland. Okay, well, thank you for watching, guys. Please subscribe and like this channel.